Before you loved someone, you noticed patterns. You noticed inconsistencies. You trusted your instincts when something felt wrong. You could look at a situation from a distance and recognize exactly what was happening. But the moment love became involved, your mind stopped searching for truth and started searching for reasons to protect the feeling. Suddenly, the things that would have disturbed you before became easier to explain away. The silence had a reason. The distance had a reason. The broken promises had a reason. Every uncomfortable feeling was forced to compete against one terrifying thought: what if accepting reality means losing them? And the fear of that answer becomes stronger than the desire to see the truth. Most people think love blinds you overnight. It doesn't. It happens so slowly that you never notice your standards moving. They don't disappear all at once. They simply shift one compromise at a time. The first disappointment feels unusual, so you forgive it. The second feels accidental, so you excuse it. The third feels confusing, so you start questioning yourself instead. Eventually, you stop measuring their behavior against your own values and begin measuring it against your hope. Hope quietly becomes the new standard. As long as there is still hope, every contradiction feels temporary. Every warning feels premature. Every instinct feels unfair. Love doesn't remove your ability to think. It changes what you're willing to believe. The strange part is that you often see everything clearly in other people's relationships. You can immediately recognize manipulation, inconsistency, emotional distance, or imbalance when it belongs to someone else. You wonder why they stay. You wonder why they keep making excuses. But when it happens inside your own story, your perspective becomes distorted. The same behavior suddenly looks different because emotion changes the angle from which you see reality. The closer your heart gets, the further your judgment drifts away. That's why intelligent people ignore obvious signs. Intelligence protects logic. Love protects attachment. Your brain begins editing reality without asking for permission. Every positive memory becomes brighter. Every painful memory becomes softer. You replay the moments that made you feel chosen while quietly deleting the moments that made you feel invisible. It's almost like watching a film where someone keeps removing the uncomfortable scenes until only the beautiful ones remain. Eventually, you don't remember the relationship as it truly existed. You remember the version your heart needed in order to keep believing. That edited version becomes stronger than reality itself. One of the most dangerous things love creates is selective attention. You stop looking at the entire person and begin focusing on isolated moments that support the future you imagined. A single act of kindness outweighs weeks of emotional absence. One meaningful conversation cancels months of confusion. One beautiful memory becomes powerful enough to silence countless disappointments. It isn't because those disappointments disappear. It's because your mind desperately searches for emotional evidence that your investment wasn't a mistake. The more you give, the harder it becomes to admit you gave it to someone who couldn't carry it. Eventually, you stop asking one important question. You no longer ask, "How does this relationship make me feel most of the time?" Instead, you ask, "What if tomorrow is different?" Your emotional life moves out of the present and begins living entirely inside possibility. Reality loses its you stop loving who they consistently are and begin loving who they occasionally become. Those rare moments of warmth feel so powerful precisely because they are rare. Scarcity tricks the heart into believing something is valuable simply because it doesn't happen often. This is why inconsistency can become more addictive than consistency. Predictable love gives your nervous system peace. Unpredictable love gives it anticipation. And anticipation can easily disguise itself as passion. You begin craving relief instead of connection. The relationship slowly transforms into an emotional cycle where you're not chasing happiness anymore. You're chasing the end of discomfort. Every brief moment of closeness feels extraordinary because it arrives after emotional deprivation. Without realizing it, your heart begins confusing emotional survival with emotional intimacy. There comes a point where protecting the relationship becomes more important than protecting yourself. You notice things that hurt you, but instead of confronting them honestly, you immediately search for explanations that make them easier to tolerate. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they've been hurt before. Maybe they don't know how to love properly. Every explanation feels compassionate. But over time, compassion quietly turns into permission. You become so busy understanding their behavior that you stop noticing how your own emotional world is shrinking. Empathy without boundaries slowly becomes self-abandonment. The frightening part is that love rarely asks you to ignore everything all at once. It simply asks you to ignore one small thing today because the relationship is special. Then another tomorrow because nobody is perfect. Then another because everyone makes mistakes. Months later, you look back and realize you have ignored dozens of things you once promised yourself you would never accept. None of those decisions felt life-changing individually. Together, they quietly changed your entire life. Love also changes the stories you tell yourself. Every unanswered question becomes an unfinished chapter instead of a warning. Every uncomfortable silence becomes something that will eventually make sense. Your imagination begins working harder than reality itself. Instead of responding to what actually exists, you respond to explanations your own mind creates. Human beings dislike uncertainty, so the brain naturally fills empty spaces with comforting assumptions. Unfortunately, those assumptions often protect fantasy more than truth. There is another painful shift that almost nobody notices. At some point, you stop trying to understand them, and you begin trying to become easier to love. You wonder if you're expecting too much. You become quieter, more patient, less expressive. You carefully remove the parts of yourself that seem to create distance, hoping that if you become simpler, softer, easier, everything will finally feel safe again. But the relationship never truly improves because the problem was never your emotions. The problem was that love convinced you your needs were obstacles instead of evidence that something important was missing. Slowly, your identity begins adapting to uncertainty. You wake up thinking about how they might feel instead of how you feel. Their mood determines your peace. Their attention determines your confidence. Their warmth determines whether today feels light or heavy. You don't notice how much emotional authority you've handed away because it doesn't happen through one dramatic decision. It happens through thousands of tiny adjustments. Every compromise feels harmless until you realize your emotional stability now depends entirely on someone else's consistency. The cruel irony is that the more emotionally invested you become, the harder it becomes to leave. Not because the relationship becomes healthier, but because leaving would force you to confront everything you've ignored. Walking away doesn't only mean losing another person. It means admitting that your instincts were right long before your excuses began. That realization hurts far more than most people expect. It's painful to lose someone. It's even more painful to discover how long you've been losing yourself. That's why many people stay far beyond the moment they became unhappy. They're no longer protecting the relationship. They're protecting the years they've already invested. Every sacrifice becomes another reason not to leave. Every memory becomes another argument against reality. The mind begins believing that if you've already endured this much, surely something meaningful must eventually come from it. But emotional investment doesn't guarantee emotional reward. Sometimes it simply guarantees that walking away feels impossibly expensive. One of the quietest forms of denial is remembering potential more vividly than patterns. Potential is comforting because it always belongs to the future. Patterns are uncomfortable because they belong to the present. It's easier to fall in love with what someone could become than to accept who they consistently choose to be. Hope paints tomorrow with beautiful colors while today's evidence quietly fades into the background. The future becomes a place where every unanswered question somehow resolves itself, even though nothing in the present suggests it will. Then one day something unusual happens. nothing dramatic changes. There isn't always a betrayal. There isn't always a final. Sometimes your mind simply becomes too exhausted to keep carrying two different realities at once. One reality is the person you believed existed. The other is the person you've repeatedly experienced. For months, maybe years, your heart managed to keep those realities separate. But eventually they collide. And when they do, the illusion doesn't explode. It dissolves. Quietly. Painfully. Permanently. That's often the moment people describe as falling out of love, but that isn't entirely accurate. They didn't suddenly stop loving. They finally stopped editing reality. They stopped rewriting uncomfortable moments into hopeful stories. They stopped giving imagination more authority than experience. They stopped confusing possibility with evidence. Nothing changed about the other person overnight. What changed was the lens through which they were finally seen. Looking back becomes its own kind of heartbreak. You remember conversations that felt confusing, and suddenly they make perfect sense. You remember moments your stomach tightened for no obvious reason. You remember promises that sounded beautiful but were never followed by action. All the pieces that once felt disconnected quietly arranged themselves into one clear picture. The truth wasn't hidden. It was simply competing against a feeling powerful enough to silence it. That realization carries an unexpected grief. You're not only mourning the relationship. You're mourning the version of yourself who kept believing. The person who defended what hurt them. The person who convinced themselves that love alone could compensate for uncertainty, inconsistency, and emotional absence. You don't feel embarrassed because you loved deeply. You feel haunted by how easily hope convinced you to negotiate with reality. The hardest lesson arrives after everything ends. You realize that your instincts never truly disappeared. They whispered from the very beginning. Every uneasy feeling. Every hesitation. Every unexplained heaviness. Every moment your mind became strangely quiet while your body felt tense. Those signals were never trying to destroy the relationship. They were trying to protect you from becoming invisible inside it. But love has an incredible ability to make protective instincts sound like unnecessary fear. So you silence them, believing that trust meant ignoring discomfort instead of understanding it. In the end, love doesn't make people ignore everything because they lack intelligence or strength. It makes them ignore everything because the human heart is built to preserve emotional connection before it preserves emotional accuracy. It would rather carry uncertainty than loss. It would rather believe a beautiful illusion than accept a painful certainty. That is why people stay long after peace has disappeared. That is why they keep hoping after patterns have already spoken. And that is why the most painful part of losing someone is often realizing that reality had been knocking on the door for a very long time. The tragedy was never that love made you care too much. The tragedy was that love slowly convinced you that seeing clearly was more dangerous than looking away. And by the time you finally opened your eyes, you weren't shocked by what you saw. You were haunted by how long it had been there, quietly waiting for the day your heart would finally allow your mind to believe it.